Well, here I am. Never in my life did I think that I would ever write here. I mean, I'm the one who's always reading about other people's stories and life problems. But I guess it's my turn, so. A little disclaimer, this is a throwaway account because I don't want this ever getting back to me. However, I need you guys to give me advice and opinions despite this being a sensitive matter. It's always a very sticky situation, so please feel free to give me the hard truth or straight-up reality. Let me give you guys a bit of context so that you aren't completely left in the lost. I'm a female 28. I've had a very successful career despite being young, but believe me, it did not really come so easily. I worked my absolute butt off just to get where I'm at today, and I had the best mentor, my amazing father. He and I have always been close. He was not only my role model, but also my best friend. Our close-knit relationship always used to irritate my mom, and she would always complain about how much time my father and I spent together. She would also complain about how much money he would spend on me, which I never understood because she would never complain about how much money he spent on my older sister. It's all thanks to my father that I was working at one of the top law firms in the States. He had put in a good word for me, and because of my excellent results and hard work and dedication, the firm hired me right there on the spot. But don't get it twisted, I worked very hard to get where I am today, and my father was only my support system. My mother and sister weren't supportive at all. See, they did not even attend both my graduations at all, and my mother, Lisa, and I never had a close relationship. She was always preferred and favored my older sister, Chloe, who's exactly like her personality-wise. They're both these girly girls and only interested in gossip, money, and their social status. I, on the other hand, have always been interested in making my own money and laws. Hence, I'm a successful attorney, at my tender age. My father was also an attorney, and he was one of the greatest attorneys in our state, and he was very respected by our community. You would think that such a hardworking man would have married someone just as hardworking and ambitious as him, right? Well, he did not. He actually married a person who was the exact opposite of him. And yes, I get it, opposites attract, yada yada. But I mean, you have to have similar interest. Once my mother married my father, she never worked again. She simply became a housewife and a stay-at-home mom, which was ironic, because she always used to drop us off at my dad's sister's place, and my Aunt Shelley, but it worked out perfectly because my cousin Jane and we were very close. So we always got to spend a bit of time together. Wow. Anyways, let me not bore you guys with too much of this detail. Unfortunately, a few months ago, my father, he fell gravely ill. The cancer completely changed and destroyed him, which honestly broke me. My father spent his last days feeling very weak and tired, but he tried his best to put up a strong front, especially when I would come see him. We would talk about his childhood, and he simply expressed to me why he worked so hard despite coming from a very wealthy family. His last words to me were beautiful, and will treasure them in my heart forever. I don't think I'll ever get over losing him. It honestly broke my heart to know that my father would not be there to walk me down the aisle on my wedding day someday. It also hurts to know that I won't get to see my father be a grandfather to my future children. He was going to be missing from so many of the future milestones and memories. The day my father passed away was the day I realized that I had lost my only reliable caring parent. A week passed since his passing, and I was busy with funeral preparations. My aunt was the only one helping me out with everything since my mother was a no-show. I had not seen my mom for over a year, mainly because she was always avoiding me. She would always make sure that we did not bump into each other during my father's visiting. I have no idea why she was avoiding me. I mean, we have literally had no contact for a year, which strangely did not bother me. Anyways, my aunt and I planned my father's funeral exactly the way that he wanted it to be. Yeah, it was finally the day of the funeral, and the turnout was so massive. It was like the whole town gathered, which made my aunt and I very happy. Everybody was giving their condolences and love, and every client that he had helped out and won cases 4 years ago were in attendance, which warmed my heart and proved how amazing my father was. Heck, one of his clients even pulled me aside to tell me how much my father had helped and changed her life. I smiled at her and thanked her for sharing her experience with my dad. I was busy in the kitchen when my mother walked in. The after tea was being served at my aunt's house since my mother was barely available and present for my father's funeral preparations. So we were unable to get permission to use their home. My mother's behavior did not surprise me, though. She was always in a very self-centered personality. Pulling this stunt of not being available for my father's funeral preparations was not surprising. She gave me a little smile and asked me how I was doing. I shrugged my shoulders and told her that I was doing the best that I possibly could. She nodded her head and told me that she completely understood what I was going through. She put her hand on my shoulder and told me that this has been extremely hard on her. Tears started streaming down her cheeks, and for the first time in my life, I actually saw my mother show some form of vulnerability. I hugged her. She cried in my arms. My sister walked in and asked what the hell's going on. Well, my mother, she thanked me for comforting her and told my sister that she and I were just talking about our father. She slightly rolled her eyes at me and told my mother that she needed her more than me, which obviously confused me. Was she really trying to make this a competition? My mother shook her head and told Chloe that she needs to talk to me in privacy. My sister frowned and asked if my mother could talk to me later because she needed her right now. My mother gave her one of her warning looks, and Chloe immediately left us alone. My mother then proceeded to ask if I could come to stay with her and Chloe for a while. I raised my eyebrows just a bit, and she continued to tell me that she really needed me. Well, my heart softened up after that because I was seeing my mother in a different light. She was hardly ever vulnerable or emotional. I told her that I would think about it, and she then told me that she wanted us to reconnect because clearly life is short and unpredictable, which was true. She told me that my father had told her that he wanted us to work on our relationship and fix things. I told her that I would love for us to work on things, and she hugged me. And honestly, I felt safe in love, something I've not really felt for a very long time. Yes, my mother and I have a complicated relationship, but I'd say at the end of the day, she's still my mom, and guys, I'm not gonna lie. I've always wanted a close relationship with her. It was easy to act like I didn't care about how she treated my sister and me differently, but that was my defenses, just coping with mechanisms. So I was glad that she wanted us to be all together during this difficult time. Am I being desperate for my mother's attention and love? I mean, this is the same woman who has not spoken to me for over a year. Guys, I would like to know, what do you think that I should do? Update number 1. Hey guys, I'm here for an update, so let me just go ahead and get right into it. Yeah, I know it's been a while. I've been staying with my mom and sister for 2 weeks now. I haven't been home since I graduated 6 years ago. Once I got the job of my dreams, I was out of this toxic household. My father would even visit me at my apartment, or we would go out. I would normally see my mom and sister at family outings or dinner, which, well, were never at home. I've been enjoying staying at home, to be honest with you. My mother and I have been spending a lot of time together, which has been driving my sister absolutely crazy. But I don't care. I was meeting up with my cousin Jane at my favorite coffee spot. We greeted each other and then ordered our coffees. Jane, she asked how I was holding up, and I told her that some days were better than others, which was not a lie at all, guys. Anyways, she also asked if I was still on leave, and I told her that I would only be going back to work at the end of the month, and that was the truth. I then started telling her about how things have been with me and my mom. I told her that we were working on our relationship and things were actually looking pretty great. Jane sighed and frowned a bit, and I asked her what was wrong, and she proceeded to tell me that she does not trust my mother and her intentions. Well, obviously, I just rolled my eyes and asked her to keep her negativity to herself, please. My response had shocked her, and she shook her head. She then reminded me that my mother has never had my best interest at heart. Well, I told her, yeah, well, that was the past now, and my mother has obviously changed, right? Guys, she raised an eyebrow and told me that no person changes in the matter of 2 weeks. Well, you know what? She might be right. I then reminded her that death can actually change people. It can make them completely different. It can change people, I'm telling you. And she just seemed to know that very, very well. Jane's father passed away a couple years ago, and his death almost destroyed her. She kept quiet for quite a bit and agreed that my statement was right, but she also told me to still be careful around my mother. I knew that Jane was coming from a good place, but she's always had a good relationship with her mom, unlike me, who's never had a good relationship with my mother, so I was just hoping that she would show me a bit of sympathy. I mean, come on. A few days passed by, and we were at my father's attorney's house. He had called me last night to inform me that I, my mother's sister, and aunt should come and see him immediately, right? Once I mentioned this to my sister, she immediately told me to tell the attorney that we would see him today, which I found to be a bit weird. The moment my aunt walked into the reception, my mother's facial expression completely changed. She went from this smiley person to straight up annoyed. She asked my aunt what she was doing there, and my aunt just ignored her. Yeah, my aunt never liked my mom, and completely vice versa. My father's attorney, he called us in, and he began to read the will. Well, we were all shocked by everything that he just stated. My father had named me as his one and only beneficiary. He had left everything to me, everything. He left nothing for my mom or sister and left one property to my aunt. Well, at that point, my mother asked the attorney to check the date of the will. And he told her that this was my father's most recent will, you know. My mother stood up angry and yelled that the attorney was a no-good liar. She stormed out of the office, and my sister ran after her. My aunt and I read over the will, and the attorney was just telling the truth. My father simply left everything to little old me. I found my sister and mother at home later in the day. I greeted them, but they ignored me, and I shrugged my shoulders and went to my room to refresh. A few hours later, my mother knocked at my door and asked if she could please just talk to me. I nodded my head, and she sat on my bed, and then she began to tell me that she wanted us to contest the will and claim that it was fake. I shook my head and told her that the will is real. Well, she frowned and asked, how did I know that it was real and that I really believed that my father would leave her absolutely nothing? I kept quiet and then stood up and yelled that since my father had left me absolutely everything, I was now in charge of taking care of her and my sister. I told her that I would help them out with their absolute basic necessities and basic needs, but I'm telling you right now, her luxury expenses? Yeah, they would have to go and find jobs if they want something like that. I mean, is that so bad for somebody to say? I mean, come on, just work for it. Anyways, my mother looked horrified once I mentioned the word get a job. Ugh. You know, I don't know why they are like this. They really are. She asked me if I was crazy and if I lost my mind, and then I told her that I would not allow her or my sister to sponge off of me for the rest of our days. She gave me a deadly stare and told me that I will certainly be regretting this. Am I being too hard on my mother and sister? I mean, there's a real valid reason why my father excluded them from his will. And they're both just perfectly fit to work, especially Chloe. Ugh. Update number 2. Guys, you know what? These past few weeks have been hell. My mother and sister, they call me every day, demanding that I send money to their bank account. They feel that they're entitled to a weekly allowance of, get this, $5,000, which is absolutely bonkers. Nonsense. My mother was being so rude and mean to me that I left and moved back to my apartment because I simply could not handle being in such a hostile environment. Sue me. I was away at work, busy with a case, when a stranger arrived inside of my office. Well, he asked me for my name and then served me with court papers. Can you believe it? Oh, right there in front of me. And once he left, I quickly scanned through the documents and my jaw almost hit the floor. My mother was taking me to court over my father's will. As I was about to text my mom, my aunt called me and told me to check out Facebook. Well, guys, I rushed to Facebook and she was accusing me of poisoning my father and forcing him to sign a will that I created. I couldn't believe what I was reading, and the post was getting a lot of interaction. I felt like my head was about to explode, so I packed up my things and ran out of the office. I got to my car, of course, but I couldn't drive away. Instead, I broke down in tears because I could not believe that my own mother was doing this to me. She was accusing me of duress. This paints me in such a negative light, especially as an attorney. After crying my lungs out, I properly went through the whole will and the documents and noticed that the court date is due for tomorrow? Well, tomorrow? Which, if I'm being honest with you guys, it just felt really strange. When did she actually file this? Getting a court date can take months at a time, and it's been, what, a couple of weeks now? Anyways, I finally drove home and called Jane. She immediately came over, and instead of telling me, "I told you so," she just told me that she would be right by my side and support me through all of this, and she really meant it. See, the court hearing was horrible. My mother used this court appearance to drag my name and reputation through the mud. She was obviously making false accusations, but one thing about my mother is that she's very manipulative, you know. What her attorney mentioned next proved how dirty and low my mother is willing to go, just to get her hands on my father's money. Her attorney mentioned that I had threatened my dying father to put me as his sole beneficiary because I wanted to help my druggy boyfriend with his drug addiction. Guys, I simply could not believe my ears. Me and Jeff have been broken up for months. Her attorney then mentioned that I was the one paying for my ex-boyfriend's rehab stay. The judge asked me if this was true, and I held back my tears, took a deep breath, and told the judge, yes, it's true. The judge then proceeded to say that they would be further investigating this case, and that my father's estate would be frozen until further notice. I rushed out of the courtroom, and both Jane and my aunt rushed after me. I broke down in tears, and my aunt just held me and told me that everything was going to be okay, and that we would prove that my mother was a liar. Yes, my ex-boyfriend was a drug addict, okay, and I was paying for his rehab. But I was only paying because I genuinely wanted him to get better. I didn't want him to suffer anymore. I just knew that his family could not afford to send him where he needed to go. My father was the only person who I had confided in this about, but then I remembered that I had confided in him via text message. My biggest mistake. And the moment my father passed away, my mom took all his personal electronics, meaning she had obtained the information by reading through me and my father's text. She was truly, ideally, the devil itself, and I was not going to let her get away with this. She is going to pay. Update number 3. 2 weeks have passed since the day of the horrible court hearing. Unfortunately, I got suspended from work because of all the drama that was surrounding me. I was heartbroken and disappointed in the firm because they were choosing to protect themselves instead of believing my side of the story. Come on. I was looking through my father's personal belongings, and while rummaging through his stuff, I came across a journal. My father never mentioned that he was into journaling much, and he always used to tell me that the best way to deal with your feelings was by going for a run. Jogging. I went through his journal, and boy, oh boy, was I shocked. Before he got sick, my father suspected that my mother was having an affair. What confused me was that if he was suspecting such, why didn't he ever confront my mom? I had always known that my parents' marriage was far from perfect, but I never thought that there was infidelity involved. I noticed that my father had written his name and surname at the back of the book. So I googled the name and almost dropped my phone when an image popped up. The name and surname belonged to my mother's attorney. I immediately brought this newfound information to both my aunt and cousin, who told me to try to get the answers from this Kinney guy. His work information was listed on the LinkedIn page. I waited for a few days and then went to my aunt just to interrogate this Kinney guy. His workplace building looked absolutely deserted. As me and aunt were looking around for Kinney everywhere, he walked in carrying a handful of documents, and I mean, this man had a whole bunch of them. Well, he dropped the moment he saw us. We greeted him, and he didn't say a word. I mean, he really just kept quiet. So I asked him what his connection was with my mother, and he smirked and proceeded to say that since it looked like my mom was going back on her word, he would be delighted to share his and my mother's dirty little secrets. My aunt and I almost had heart attacks after Kenny exposed it. You will not believe this. He explained that he and my mom have been high school sweethearts, but because he came from a poor family, my mother eventually left him for my dad. He told us that my mother had never been faithful to my father and that Chloe was his child. I told him that he was a liar, and he simply laughed and laughed and laughed, and then asked, why don't we find out? Oh yeah, why don't we find it weird that Chloe was the only person in our family with brown eyes, yet my mother had blue eyes and my father had green eyes, just like me. Well, that's when I looked at his eyes, which were the same shade, same exact color of brown as Chloe's. My mind could not even perceive what I was hearing. He then went into a dodgy room and came back with a paternity document that proved, oh yeah, Chloe was his. Guys, I'm shocked. I can't believe it. Couldn't believe any of it. So, turns out Chloe is my half-sister, but now it makes sense why my father left her out of the will. Kenny further explained that my mother had promised to give him a certain percentage of my father's estate if he helped her prove that my father's will was invalid. He then explained that ever since the court froze my father's estate, my mother has been avoiding him and that she had even blocked him. I knew exactly how I was going to use this new information. A week later, we went back to court. However, my mother had no legal representation. None at all. Kenny had informed us that he would not be representing my mother because she was used and a liar. So I then decided to use this opportunity to destroy my mother's perfect wife reputation. I informed the court about my mother's motive and infidelity. My mother gasped in shock when I revealed to the whole courtroom that she had been cheating on my father, hence why he excluded her from the will. Chloe looked devastated and was close to tears. Kenny had informed us that Chloe did not know that he was her dad. My mother tried charging at me, but luckily security got to her. She started screaming at me and then exposed her motive to everybody who was caring enough to listen. Her motive was that she had a feeling that my father was going to pull the stunt of leaving every single thing to me. She screamed that she was entitled to my father's money. I mean, she said she deserved it. Every last penny. That's right. She had put up with his boring self for so many years. And at that point, the security guards, well, they were trying to escort my mother out, but she kept kicking and screaming and fighting them off. She yelled that the only reason she had me was that my father would never leave her. She exposed that she had only had me because she wanted to have access to my father's estate, and yelled that she wished my father had died before I was 18 so that she could have inherited his estate. I couldn't take her words anymore, guys. I impulsively tried to charge at her despite her being held by big ol' security guards. My aunt held me back and told me that I had more to lose than my mother. I was so just full with so much hate and anger. They finally managed to escort my mother out of the room. I mean, was I wrong for trying to get physical with my own mom? What would you have done? Final update. Guys, this is it. Hello, everybody. So, sorry for leaving you kind of on a cliffhanger. I mean, a few months have passed since that horrible, horrible day. Even to this day, I've not healed from the trauma. It has me grieving for my father so much harder because now I know that he's been in a loveless marriage his whole life, and that my so-called mom has just been using him for the entirety of the marriage. The court immediately sent out a motion to unfreeze my father's estate, and I remained the only beneficiary. Well, my aunt got one of his properties, but that's about it. Just to put this specific detail to rest, because everyone's asking, yes, my ex-boyfriend is out of rehab, so I'm no longer paying for him to stay. I cut all communication with him, not because of how my mother exposed that part of my life, but because he was the promise I made to myself, to cut him off the moment he's finally clean. I also left the law firm I was working at and started my very own law firm, baby, with the help of Kenny. Funny enough, he's a cool guy when he's not following my mom's orders. Well, Chloe and I are attending therapy together. Despite everything that we've been through, we both agreed that we wanted to work on our relationship, which I'm grateful for. Chloe has also decided that she wants a relationship with her real dad, and they've actually been spending time together, and honestly, I'm just extremely happy for her. Guys, I have absolutely no contact with my mom. I have no idea where she is. All I know is that she's been humiliated, embarrassed, well, to the point where she left town, and nobody's heard from her. She hasn't even contacted Kenny or Chloe. You know, it kind of makes me wonder, Did I make the right decision? Did I take things too far? I sometimes question myself.